Okay, imagine this for a second. You get told you have just 2 days. 2 days to pack one suitcase. And that's it. You're being sent away basically to prison.
Wow.
You have to leave everything else, your house, your stuff, your pets, everything. And you don't even know where you're going.
That's a really stark image.
It is. And that's exactly the scenario Helen Hannan-Parra presented when she spoke recently in 2025 at Oro High School.
And Helen's story, her experience, that's really our focus for this deep dive, isn't it? We're looking into this really difficult chapter in U.S. history during World War II.
Exactly. The incarceration of Japanese Americans.
A period that, honestly, we still need to grapple with. There are so many lessons there.
Absolutely. So for today, our main source is that talk Helen gave at Oro High School. We'll also be pulling from her book, which is very aptly titled 2 Days and One Suitcase.
Right.
And we've got some reviews of the book, too, to add a bit more context.
And Helen's perspective is pretty unique. She saw this unfold firsthand. But she was just a kid, 12 years old in 1945. Her brother Larry was 14, and her sister Mari was almost 16.
Right, the youngest.
Yeah. And crucially, her family wasn't incarcerated because of their heritage. Her father, a lawyer, made this incredible choice to actually go and work inside one of these camps. So the whole family went into this environment.
Which gives Helen, this young observer, just this incredible, almost innocent but really sharp view of what was happening.
Exactly. A child's perspective, but seeing things very clearly.
So our goal here isn't just to list facts. We want to understand this through her eyes, her family's eyes. Look at the staggering injustice, the resilience of the people who are imprisoned, which is just incredible, and the lessons, the really vital lessons. Helen, now in her 90s, believes we absolutely have to learn from this.
Okay, so let's dig in, maybe starting with the bigger picture. What was the world like in 1945? The book's forward gives us some context there.
Yeah, it sets the stage. I mean, World War II was obviously enormous. It had been raging for years by 45.
Involved something like over 45 countries, right?
Yeah.
Axis versus allies, Germany, Italy, Japan against the U.S., Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, so many others.
The scale is just mind-boggling. The source mentions over 50 million soldiers lost. And that's just soldiers.
Right, doesn't even touch the civilian costs, the cities destroyed. It was total war.
And even though the main fighting wasn't here in the U.S., life on the home front was completely transformed.
Oh, yeah. The source talks about rationing being a big thing. People eating less so food could go overseas.
Factories changed everything. Shoe factories making bullets, toy factories making plane parts, that kind of thing.
In conservation. Remember those drives for scrap metal? People taking down fences, saving rubber, fixing clothes because you couldn't just buy new ones.
No new cars, gas was rationed. It was definitely a time of sacrifice here, too.
But, as the book points out, those sacrifices, while real, were nothing compared to what people were enduring elsewhere. Cities in rubble, orphans everywhere.
And the horrors of the death camps in Europe were just starting to come to light, a truly grim backdrop.
And it's in this climate of global war, this fear that the war hits home in a really direct and awful way for Japanese Americans. It all stems from Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941.
Helen remembers that day so clearly. A snowy Sunday morning, peaceful, her mom humming Silent Night, mending a sock.
Just a quiet family moment.
Completely shattered. A neighbor bursts in yelling about Pearl Harbor being bombed, that we're at war. Helen said it felt like being swept away by violent rushing water.
Even as a kid, not knowing what Pearl Harbor was, she understood bombed. The fear was instant.
And immediate for her family. Her mom dropped the sock. Her dad, who worked at an army base, just grabbed his coat and left. She didn't see him for 3 days.
Wow. That sudden absence, the uncertainty. And the whole country reacted with that kind of shock, but mixed with anger and, tragically, a lot of racial prejudice.
Yeah, the nation was gripped by it.
And that fear, that prejudice led directly to this massive violation of civil rights.
The mass incarceration.
Yes. Done in the name of national security, though history really shows that it was just a pretext. About 120,000 innocent Japanese Americans forced from their homes and put into these camps.
And it wasn't just men suspected of something, it was everyone. Men, women, children, babies, grandparents, citizens and non-citizens alike.
And this is absolutely critical, something the source emphasizes repeatedly. Not one single person out of those 120,000 was ever found guilty of espionage or sabotage. Zero.
Innocent people locked up based purely on their ancestry.
Which brings us to the language. Helen's talk, the book, they insist on using the term concentration camps.
Not the softer internment camps.
Right, because, well, definitionally, a concentration camp is where you imprison large numbers of people, often minorities, without trial, in poor conditions. And that's exactly what these were. Innocent people concentrated and imprisoned because of their ethnicity. Concentration camp is just the more accurate, honest term.
So within this context, we have Helen's family, not Japanese American, but choosing to enter this world.
Right. Her dad was a lawyer. A successful one, actually had a good job waiting for him back in Chicago. Her parents were described as having strong values based on their religious beliefs, trying to live by those principles.
And the kids. Murray, almost 16, sounds like she was quite determined. Brave, strong, thinking about big issues. A Joan of Arc type.
Larry, 14, maybe a bit quieter, into school, sports, but already planning to be a lawyer like his dad, wanting to do good.
And Helen, 12, the observer. The one taking it all in who would eventually tell the story.
And in 1945, their lives had already been disrupted by the war. They'd moved 4 times. They were in Florida because Dad was training troops for Europe.
But then the war in Europe ended. VE Day happened in May 45, so his assignment was ending.
The plan was Chicago, back to normal life. But then Dad heard about something completely unexpected.
He sounds like quite a person. The source calls him an amazing person, fine lawyer, fine human being. Apparently, he'd even left a previous post, partly because of a general who disliked Jewish people.
Which is ironic, given the war against Nazism. But yeah, a friend asked him what was next, assuming Chicago.
And the friend mentions the government is looking for lawyers. Specifically, the War Relocation Authority, the WRA.
The WRA. The agency running the camps. Dad had never even heard of them. The government kept it incredibly quiet, apparently realizing just how bad it was.
The friend said he'd be perfect.
And Dad's reaction wasn't just, oh, a job opening. He made a choice.
A profound one.
Yeah. Instead of going back to his comfortable life, he decided to take the job and go to one of these camps. Why? Because he wanted to help the people in prison there. Simple as that. Driven by his values.
So, no trip to Chicago. Instead, this long, difficult journey from Florida all the way to Camp Amache in Colorado.
Even the journey sounds tough.
Yeah.
Driving through swamps, pulling a trailer with wooden wheels.
Wooden wheels because of wartime shortages. And the trailer actually collapsed on the way. Helen joked maybe God wanted them to get there.
It definitely wasn't an easy trip. And for Helen, camp meant summer camp. Fun stuff.
Right. Not prison, which is what these places were.
And arriving at Amache must have been a shock, even for her, being an army brat used to bases.
She describes guard towers everywhere. Soldiers with guns pointed down into the camp, not out, even on the employee side where they lived.
That's chilling. Unsettling doesn't even cover it.
And the core difference she immediately understood. If she walked out the main gate, okay. If a prisoner walked out that gate, they'd be shot.
That just lays it bare, doesn't it? It's confinement under threat of death.
Yet Dad's first impression of the people inside the fence was really positive. The source says he fell in love with them.
Found them wonderful, admired how they were coping, especially with whole families crammed together, babies, elders, everyone. He saw their strength.
But the conditions they were forced to live in were, well, Helen calls them horrible.
And the details bear that out. Barracks rooms, tiny, maybe 20 by 20 feet. Yeah. And the furniture. 1 army cot per person. That's it.
1 cot. So a family of, say, 8 people in 1 small room gets 8 cots and nothing else. No table, no chairs.
Nothing else provided. Just the cots. And 1 single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling.
Wow. That 1 light bulb. The source says it dominated life.
You can imagine. Trying to sleep with a baby, grandma wanting rest, teenagers needing light for homework. Everyone had to agree when it was on or off. Constant conflict.
Kids doing homework by dawn's light through the 1 window. And searchlights outside sweeping across at night. No peace.
It really supports Helen's feeling about the government's attitude. She said they didn't see these people as human.
Just something they had to store. Keep alive, barely, to avoid trouble, not out of any actual care.
Dehumanizing. Absolutely.
The food was also apparently horrible, which is extra cruel when you consider many were farmers or from cultures with, frankly, better food traditions than standard American fare back then.
And the bathrooms. No. Communal bathrooms with 0 privacy. No stalls, no curtains, no doors, just lines of toilets. Needing to use the facilities right next to strangers, elders.
It's just treating people like animals, as Helen put it. A deliberate stripping of dignity.
Meanwhile, the Hannan family, on the Saff side, had an actual apartment. Several rooms, a bathroom, kitchen. Lucky, yes, but it highlights the huge gap in conditions within the same fence.
Definitely underscores the difference between staff and prisoner realities.
Let's circle back to the order that started it all, Executive Order 9066. How did Helen's parents react when they learned Roosevelt signed it?
They were shocked, upset. They'd admired Roosevelt before for his work during the Depression. This felt like a betrayal.
They believed he knew it was wrong, morally and legally.
Yeah, they thought he knew it wasn't even necessary for security, but that he just caved into pressure.
Pressure from prejudiced groups using the war as an excuse. That's a recurring theme, isn't it? Prejudice disguised as necessity.
And this led to a really important lesson from Dad, something Helen clearly never forgot.
What was that?
He told the kids, basically, the higher up you are, the more people you can hurt with bad decisions. So the obligation to do the right thing is even greater, especially when it's hard.
Wow. That resonates, especially given what he was doing, choosing the hard path himself.
Exactly. It explains so much about his character, and this whole discussion made Helen wonder, were these people not citizens? Is that why they were locked up?
A logical question for a kid. But her mom explained, no, most of them were American citizens, born right here. It was often their parents or grandparents who were born in Japan.
But why weren't they citizens then if they hadn't done anything wrong? That's when Dad brought up this old law.
The 1790 law. Larry, the quick one, figured out it was over 150 years old.
And it specifically said Asian immigrants couldn't become citizens, just barred, for over a century and a half.
So this wasn't some new wartime measure. It was built on long-standing discrimination. And learning this hit Larry hard.
Yeah, he connected it to the national anthem, Land of the Free. Suddenly felt like a lie, or only true for some people. He said he might never sing it the same way again, maybe never sing it at all.
A real moment of disillusionment, realizing the gap between the ideal and the reality.
And Mari, his sister, her reaction was different. More like, okay, they can do this horrible thing, but there is something I can do about it. Right now.
Action-oriented, wanting to fight back somehow, even then.
The source also includes some really harrowing accounts of what the very first arrivals at Amache faced, from someone named Edna and a staff member Dad talked to.
It sounds like pure chaos. The camp wasn't even finished construction when the Army forced people to leave their homes and ship them there. They refused to delay.
So people arrive by train at night in the middle of nowhere, and there are no lights.
None. They had to stumble around in the dark, following people holding candles, falling into ditches dug for buildings that weren't even there yet.
And living in houses made of cardboard.
Cardboard. With only candlelight at night. Imagine the fire risk. Plus, hardly any bathrooms, people walking blocks for water, and the water itself wasn't even clean initially. Had to be trucked in.
Just unbelievable neglect. Criminal, really.
Dad's reaction when he heard this. That is just a complete disregard for human life. He saw it clearly. The government viewed them as dangerous things, not people. Creatures of no value who simply have to be kept alive.
Kept alive just enough to avoid trouble, and he felt the government didn't care at all about destroying their previous lives. Just gone, like magic.
Amidst hearing all this awfulness, there's this touching family moment. Mom asks Dad if he's sorry they came.
And his smile showed they were in it together. Mari says, sometimes just trying to help is helping. Then a family hug. A small moment of connection in a dark place.
It shows their shared purpose. But even with that support, the daily reality for the prisoners was grim. Nothing to do, everything left behind.
No toys, no music, no hobbies. Can't even keep snacks in your room. Just emptiness.
But they didn't just give up. They started building a life, a small town life, the source calls it. Anybody who knew how to do something taught something. Organized clubs, classes, especially for the kids. They knew this was the only childhood those kids would get there.
And they were thinking ahead too, aren't they?
Definitely. They knew these kids would eventually compete with kids on the outside for college, for jobs, so they had to give them the best education, the best preparation possible under the circumstances. They couldn't just sit there and salt, as the source puts it. Couldn't just wallow.
That's incredible foresight and dedication. And creativity, too, finding beauty in these ugly places.
Yeah, painting, wood carving. At Tule, people dug deep for old shells to make jewelry. Helen got these little carved wooden birds from an old man. Small acts of creation of humanity.
And practical creativity, too, making furniture from scrap wood because the government gave them almost nothing.
Right. Shelves, tables, chairs, bunk beds to save space. Molly's family did that. It wasn't technically allowed, but you had to survive, make the space livable. Ingenuity born from pure need.
So this strange mix of injustice and resilience. Then the war starts ending. VE Day in Europe, big celebrations back east. Helen saw some of that before they went to Amache.
Yeah, singing, dancing in the streets, Times Square going wild, Truman announcing victory but cautioning the war with Japan was still on.
But when the end finally came, with the atomic bombs dropped on Japan in August 45, the reaction inside Amache was totally different.
Very different. It was deeply sad. Many people there had family in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They lost loved ones.
So no celebrations.
Not a sound, the source says. Just relief it was over, but overshadowed by grief and loss. Too many people were hurting.
And the war ending didn't mean immediate freedom for everyone. Amache closed, but many were still held elsewhere.
And the Hannan family expecting to finally go home to Chicago.
Dad throws them a curveball.
A big one. He felt he hadn't done enough. He heard about Tule Lake up near Oregon, the segregation center.
Where they sent the quote-unquote bad apples, the ones considered disloyal, people in real trouble.
And Dad decided that's where he needed to go. To the hardest place, where people needed help the most, instead of going home.
Tule Lake sounds like it was on another level entirely.
Oh, yeah. Ellen said Amache was a suburb compared to this. Tule Lake was under martial law. The army ran everything. The general had immense power.
And there were tanks driving inside the camp.
Tanks patrolling the grounds. Imagine the atmosphere. Constant fear. One wrong move, you could get shot. It was designed to intimidate, to punish.
And the government used that loyalty questionnaire there to stir up more trouble.
Deliberately divisive. It asked about loyalty to the U.S., but also demanded people renounce Japanese citizenship.
Which was impossible for many older people, right? Because of that 1790 law, they couldn't be U.S. citizens. Renouncing Japanese citizenship would make them stateless.
Exactly. Belonging to no country. So they were trapped. If they kept Japanese citizenship, their only option, they looked disloyal. It was a cruel catch-22.
All while young Japanese-American men, like in the 442nd, were fighting and dying for the U.S. overseas.
The irony is just staggering. The 442nd, the most decorated unit, fighting for the country, imprisoning their families, and questioning their loyalty.
And Tule Lake had a prison inside the prison.
Yeah, for resistors or troublemakers. And they boarded up the windows so they couldn't even see family waving outside. Just layer upon layer of cruelty.
Dad's work there must have been incredibly challenging, but vital.
Absolutely. The source highlights how he fought for people, like insisting young U.S. citizens being sent to Japan get fingerprinted.
Why was that so important?
It provided undeniable proof of their U.S. citizenship, something nobody else thought of, but it could help them return later. He was thinking ahead, trying to protect their rights.
Fighting the system from within.
He also helped people forced to renounce citizenship prepare for hearings, using his legal skills in this incredibly hostile environment.
And as the camps finally closed, it must have been such a mixed, emotional time.
Yeah, some trying to go home, hoping for the best. Others sent to Japan against their will. And those poor elders who thought Japan had won.
Only to arrive in Yokohama Bay and see devastation and people begging. What a terrible shock after years of imprisonment.
Helen shares some really personal stories that capture the feeling of the camps. Signing out her friend Tommy from Tule Lake.
Like checking out a library book.
Exactly. Going to the guard, signing the form. Tommy just standing there like an inanimate object. The guard growling the return time. It just shows the complete dehumanization.
Treated like property.
And years later, meeting that man who was 17 in Tule Lake, still feeling uneasy. Helen telling him, "You were imprisoned because the government did something wrong to you."
And he'd never heard that before.
Never. He was stunned. Said, "No one has ever told me that. I feel much better now." Just hearing the truth acknowledged lifted some of that burden.
The power of words, of framing it correctly.
Yeah.
And then the reunion with Alice at the Del Oro talk, our childhood friend from Amache.
80 years later, they met in camp, Alice and her sisters coming over to the staff side because there was nothing for them to do, making french fries, playing games.
And Dad paying for Alice to go to boarding school with Helen for a month when the camp school closed, because she was too smart to be left sitting around.
Just an amazing act of kindness and belief in her potential. And reconnecting after 80 years, picking up right where they left off, shows the strength of those bonds formed under pressure.
So why is Helen, at 91, still telling the story so passionately, writing the book, giving talks?
She actually started writing about her anger in the camp, hiding under her bed. But her message now is incredibly clear and urgent. This could happen again.
She aimed that right at the students, didn't she? And really at all of us.
Yep. Basically said, you teenagers, in 30 years, you'll be running things. Get it right. Don't repeat the mistakes of the past. This must never happen again.
Passing the torch, demanding vigilance.
And repeating her father's point. The higher your position, the more harm you can do if you get it wrong. Emphasizing that some listening will be in those positions.
She connected it directly to more recent events, too, like post-9/11.
Yeah, she mentioned hearing people talk about locking up everyone wearing a turban. The fear, the prejudice bubbling up again.
And the terrible consequences, people being shot just for their appearance, associating dark skin with being bad.
Her point being, you don't choose your skin color. It means nothing about who you are. It's a warning against letting fear drive policy against prejudice.
The reviews of her book pick up on that too, right? The goodness of the Hannan family, making the history less bleak.
And calling it timely and inspirational. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It reinforces her whole message. Understanding this history, the choices people made, good and bad, is crucial.
So, wrapping this up, this deep dive into Helen's story through her talk, her book, it's powerful. The injustice, the cruelty, the conditions, but also the incredible resilience, the creativity, the fight for dignity.
And it's so clear this wasn't about security. It was about fear and racism, plain and simple. A massive failure of American ideals.
And Helen's message, 80 years on, feels less like history and more like a current events warning, knowing how easily rights were overridden by fear.
It puts a responsibility on us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you, listening now, make sure this doesn't happen again? What do you do when you see injustice fueled by fear or prejudice in your own life, your own time?
That's the question Helen leaves us with. What's our responsibility, knowing this history? It's something to really think about.